The Fuji X-T1 is a serious camera, serious controls, serious size, serious weight, and a serious price, for a mirrorless camera anyway. It's got a good solid feel, and it exudes a certain chic hipster charm.
And if you're serious about photography, there's lots you're sure to like physical manual controls. There's a dial for ISO, for shutter speed, and for EV, dedicated switches for focus mode, drive mode, and metering. You're sure to like the big bright electronic viewfinder centered over the lens, very responsive. If you think optical is the only way to go, this could change your mind. On the lens you'll find rings for focus, zoom, and aperture. That adds up to full manual control without ever having to look at a menu. I really enjoy using these physical controls and the fast access they provide. If this camera used film, it would represent the absolute high end of film cameras. But it is digital, with a 16 megapixel APS-C size sensor, an articulated LCD screen for review and live shooting. It even shoots movies, well, video really, with sound. The kit includes a better than average removable flash, powerful enough to be used for daylight fill, and sophisticated enough to have slow sync and second curtain sync options. And there's a sync socket, very old school. There are two more virtual dials, one on the front, which provides more granular shutter speed adjustments than the big dial. Set the shutter speed to 125 and the front dial provides 4 stops from 80 to 160. It's also used to set longer exposures when you select the T setting. The back dial is used to control the aperture on lenses without a dedicated aperture dial. And there's a 5-way navigation keypad.
When you venture into the menu system, you'll find a pantload of capabilities to help you take great photos, as well as a selection of electronic tchotchkes and assorted spiffs.
First, there are Fuji film emulations, digital simulations that mimic the qualities of Fuji's famous film brands, Provia, Velvia, Astia, Sepia, 2 negative as well as 4 black and white settings. Worth noting that film selection only affects JPEGs, so use RAW Plus when using these settings, which is nice, you'll have both to work with. There's a quick menu system, press the Q button, use the navigation keys to select an item, the rear dial to change, handy for changing the other shooting settings on the fly. And this menu includes 4 creative controls to adjust highlight and shadow tone, color, and sharpness. There are 5 adjustment steps, with no visual feedback as you adjust. As you can see from these photos taken with color at +2 and -2, there's not a lot of range. The full menu system uses tabs for fast navigation with 2 variations, one for playback, the other for shooting. Both appear on the LCD or in the viewfinder. Some settings, like autofocus with the right arrow, have even more options, which means that some capabilities are kind of hidden. I'm not sure of the rationale that combined bracket and advanced filters, and while they may be hard to access on the menu, there is a much easier way. The drive mode dial includes drive options, as well as settings for panorama, filter effects, and multiple exposure. Devote an afternoon to explore the depth offered here. For example, select bracket, press the front custom button, and the X-T1's comprehensive bracket options, including ISO, film simulation, dynamic range, and white balance appear. Exposure bracket takes 3 successive images, 1/3 to 1 full stop. ISO is the same, but changes ISO instead of shutter speed. Perfect for creating HDR images. Film simulation saves 3 versions of the image from a single exposure. Standard, Velvia, and Astia, or customize them deep in the menu. The 2 burst modes are marginally less than the best I've experienced. At high speed, with manual exposure and focus, over 40 JPEG images at 8 per second before it slows down to about 4 per second, which it maintains seemingly indefinitely on a high-speed UHS-2 SD card. When you turn the dial to Advanced and press the same button, the list of effects appears. Smart. There are 7 effects and 6 partial colors. Meh. It's actually hard to understand why Fuji includes these. Someone who is attracted to this camera for the obvious right reasons is unlikely to care about toy camera mode, although the tilt-shift simulating miniature mode might be of interest. And I did have some fun with the multiple exposure. Panorama works as expected. You can select direction, left, right, up, down, and size. Medium is 6400 by 1440, large is 9600 by 1440, a little smaller than other cameras I've looked at recently. The drive dial was the only one I ever changed inadvertently, so I learned to keep my eye on it. There are 6 customizable buttons, nice visual menu for this, but pressing and holding any of the customizable buttons also brings up the customization menu. That's a nice design detail. The 2300 dot OLED viewfinder is large and bright with a -4 to +2 diopter adjustment. There's an eye sensor for auto switching and a very handy view mode button to change from auto to viewfinder only or LCD only. A dual mode sets the LCD to an information display to check but not change settings. I'd like this better if it was integrated into the quick menu. If you rotate to portrait, the viewfinder's on-screen indicators change too. Nice! Would everyone else please follow suit? But Fuji, how about the LCD? I really appreciate the on-screen level. Did I mention the viewfinder display was big? So big you feel like you're sitting in the front row at the cinema. So big there's a large and a normal mode, so you don't have to crane your eyeball around. So big that in manual focus mode there's a dual display option so you can focus and compose at the same time. Takes a little getting used to. The viewfinder's manual preview off setting will provide a visible picture if you're exposing for flash and otherwise wouldn't see anything. A nice option. Wish that was available on a custom button. In either setting, the viewfinder brightness is continually changing, which can be misleading for accurate exposure. Fuji supplied their new weather-resistant XF18-135 lens in the review kit. That's 27-206 in 35mm terms. With a 67mm filter diameter, it's large, solid, well-made, good action on the zoom and focus dials, physical detents on the aperture ring. It pairs well with the X-T1, although the combined weight is a hefty 900 grams. That's heavy for a mirrorless camera. Aperture ramps from the not-so-wide-eyed 3.5 to 5.6 as you zoom in. As a result, there are no f-stop markings on the dial. It squints down to f22. Dedicated physical controls turn optical stabilization on and select auto aperture. Closest focus is 45 centimeters. It's a pleasure to use with an extraordinarily pleasant bokeh, even when fully zoomed in at 5.6. It's crisp, colorful, and contrasty, worked well for racing cyclists, jumping equestrians, food portraits, night scenes. It did not work well for video. It goes out of focus while the zoom is being adjusted and then returns to focus. The effect is noticeable in video, but not problematic for stills. The autofocus was not as fast as the Fuji X-T2, but I suspect that's a lens issue, not a fault of the camera. When shooting rapidly, not in burst mode, it would sometimes focus incorrectly, and continuous autofocus in burst mode was particularly disappointing. I'm willing to accept that there may be other combinations of focus mode and area settings that might work better, but I did try several. Size, shape, and placement make the controls easy to find, even with my eye on the viewfinder. Manual mode is clearly more work, but managing the settings for every image reminds you of the creative potential you have for creating photos. One evening, I set film type to black and white, ISO to 6400, certainly something that's possible with other cameras, but hidden in all the manual controls are full autofocus and auto exposure. Autofocus single or continuous, using this switch. Each dial has an A position. If you want auto iris, slide the switch to A. Auto shutter, turn the dial to A. Now the display shows P, which includes the ability to turn the front dial for alternate shutter aperture combinations for the current lighting. There's even an auto ISO setting with some very useful options. Set the minimum shutter speed before ISO is changed and then a maximum ISO. I like that, but when the maximum ISO is reached, the X-T1 slows the shutter, which may be less preferable to noise. The ISO dial tops out at 6400, but the menu allows you to select speeds up to 51,200 for the H1 and 2 positions. I assume that means they're less than optimal. The exposure meter provides a visual cue when the correct exposure is reached in manual mode. In semi-auto modes, you have to rely on the red warning of the setting that can't get to where it wants to be. Auto mode on the X-T1 doesn't know whether you're shooting at a poorly lit party, birds at a feeder, or a road race. Other cameras have scene modes to compensate for that. So after trying the auto settings, I'm back to manual pretty quickly. Shutter speed ranges from bulb to 1/4000th and includes a 1/80th flash sync setting. The large and stiff EV dial provides 3 stops either side of 0. A dynamic range adjustment is available over 800 ISO and is disappointing. Comparing the same image with 100 to 400%, the difference is minimal. Whites are still blown, dark areas still dark. In manual focus mode, the AFL button provides one push focus. This disengages focus from the shutter nicely. And there are 3 different focus assist modes: zoom, black and white split image, and peak highlight. Hold the focus assist button to change. Useful. There is face detect, which I think of as focus mode. There's a hidden menu feature. High performance in the power management settings increases focus speed. It also reduces startup time. I'm not sure why the self-timer isn't a drive mode, but that does leave an interesting undocumented feature. Set a self-timer in burst mode and you get 5 images. Great for large group shots when you need to be in it and want to make sure everyone's eyes are open. There's an intervalometer for time-lapse photography. It's not on the drive dial either, but in the shooting menu. You can set the interval in 1-second increments and select up to 999 images, that's 16 minutes. There's also a delay start before the first image. With a 1-second interval, I was able to record 999 images and the battery still indicated a full charge. You'll want a 64GB SD card if you're taking 999 raw images, and at 30 frames per second, that's just over 30 seconds of video. There's no option to create a movie from the stills, but that's a task most video editing software can handle. In general, battery life is excellent. I was able to take over 900 images and some video during an intensive day of shooting at the Grand Prix Cycliste in Montreal. Movie mode is somewhat basic. Press the start and stop recording button beside the shutter release. It requires a good hard push. No accidental recordings here. There are 4 options: 30 and 60p modes available at 720 and 1080 resolutions. Files are recorded in H.264 MOV format at a data rate about 38 megabits per second for the 60p 1080 setting. Video is clean and clear, free of rolling shutter artifacts. Video settings are limited to aperture, and that can only be adjusted before recording. There's auto ISO and shutter for video. In auto ISO mode, you have 2 stops of EV, which can be adjusted while shooting. You can zoom and focus, although the focus assist doesn't work while recording. I was pleased to find a mic input in addition to the onboard mics. It's the smaller than usual micro size. I was disappointed that there's no live HDMI out to use an external monitor or recorder. The HDMI only works during playback of stills or movies. Video length is limited to 14 minutes 30 seconds at 1080, shorter than most still cameras, 28 minutes at 720. Yay, Wi-Fi! Well, pretty much all cameras have that now. This pairs with Fuji's Camera Remote app. I was confused and downloaded the Fuji Camera application. Wrong. Both iOS and Android versions available. 4 functions, but you must reconnect each time you exit a function. That's awkward. Remote control takes photos and video. Switching from shutter to aperture is a little cumbersome. The image is a little small on an iPhone and the app works only in portrait mode. You can adjust shutter, aperture, ISO to or from any setting but A. Do that before you turn on Wi-Fi. Switching to playback provides the ability to transfer images to the phone. You can't transfer images taken in RAW, which is a huge limitation. Boo! The camera knows how to convert, just do it. There is an option to resize to 3 megs. Easy workaround is to shoot RAW+. The geotag saves the phone's geolocation to the camera, which uses it for the next 3 hours. There's a menu option to turn this on and off. An external battery charger is provided, which is nice, but the option to charge or power the camera from the USB port would also be appreciated. Know what else would be nice? Some high-speed internal memory and an ND filter.
This camera is fun to use. I really enjoyed my time with it. And if you're serious about photography, Fuji might not be your first choice. But the X-T1's emphasis on physical controls along with the top-notch sensor make it a serious contender for photo enthusiasts.